Another example of taking risks was in the run-up to the Iraq War. I was an opponent of that war. I was convinced that we should not be going into that war alongside the Americans. There was a fundamentally, fatally flawed prospectus, that there was no clear evidence of weapons of mass destruction, that there was no evidence at all of a 45-minute warning. Saddam Hussein was a tyrant, and I'd been campaigning against him for many years prior to the Iraq War, unlike Tony Blair and George Bush. I'd never heard them speak out against Saddam Hussein until the Iraq War, but I and a few others had. So I had no brief for Saddam Hussein, and I wanted to see him go, but not by that intervention, not by that war, not on that flimsy, or indeed non-existent evidence. It was flimsy at the time and has been proven since to have been non-existent. Now, I decided I wanted to do something. I went on all the marches and I thought that was great. Indeed, it was fantastic that 1 million or plus more people had marched against the Iraq War. But Tony Blair's government did not listen. I wanted to do something more. So I decided in the period shortly before the war was launched that I would try and ambush Tony Blair's motorcade as a protest to show that, for me personally, I was against this war and that I represented many, many others, the majority of the British people, who were also against that war. So I heard that Tony Blair was going to meet the German Chancellor, the then German Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, at the Royal Academy at 5 p.m. on a particular day. So I decided to lay in wait and ambush his motorcade. This was at a time when the IRA was still active. So you can imagine all the area around the Royal Academy and Piccadilly was swarming with police, including sharpshooters on building tops. So I knew that trying to ambush him right by the Royal Academy wouldn't work. There was just too many police, I'd be spotted. So what I did was I moved further up Piccadilly towards Green Park and positioned myself in a gift shop where I had a view up the street so I could see what was coming. Now my assumption was Piccadilly is a one-way street. In theory, the Prime Minister could come up against the traffic with a motorcycle escort, but in probability my guess was that he'd come with the traffic flow. So come from Green Park down Piccadilly to the Royal Academy. It was a guess. I could have been totally wrong. I also knew that in this atmosphere, when the IRA was still active, when there was a risk, the peace process had already begun, but there still were IRA or dissident Republicans active at that time, not to mention other terrorist threats potentially against the Prime Minister. So I knew that his security detail would be on high alert and that any intervention could result in a very sharp response. When I say sharp response, could result in gunfire for all I know. But I calculated that, again, that was a risk worth taking to make a point. I also made a risk calculation on the assumption, as I said, that he would come with the traffic flow, and that when I saw the police motorcycle outriders, it would be Tony Blair and not Gerhard Schroeder. It'd be incredibly embarrassing if I ambushed Gerhard Schroeder's motorcade. So those are the risks and the calculations. So I lay in wait in this bookshop, in this gift shop, with a clear view up Piccadilly. And Waited and waited and waited. He was a bit late. I began to think, oh, maybe he's gone the other way and gone in the other way, I didn't see him. But then sure enough, along came the motorcycle outriders with their sirens and blue lights. And I thought to myself, this is either Tony Blair or Gerhard Schroeder. Let's hope it's Tony Blair. And so I allowed the motorcycle outriders to get almost parallel with the shop. And then I walked swiftly out the door, across the road, allowed the first car to go past, which was like a SUV type, Jeep type vehicle, which is used by prime ministerial security, and then calculated the next vehicle would be his, and then walked straight out in front of it. It screeched to a halt about a foot from my legs. I pulled out a placard protesting the Iraq War. Tony Blair was in the back, he rolled his eyes. But what was astonishing is, of course, the motorcycle outriders and the first security detail kept on driving. They hadn't realized anything had happened. And the security detail in the other car behind also hadn't apparently understood, hadn't seen me walk in front, and hadn't realized why the Prime Minister's car had stopped. So it seemed like an eternity. I was standing there with my placard. It was probably only 60 seconds or 90 seconds. And then eventually they piled out and sought to remove me. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go willingly. I'm not going to resist or be violent, but I'm going to, put up passive resistance. So I held on to the under chassis of the Prime Minister's limousine. And I had 3 or 4 special branch detectives trying to wrestle me away, and with all their strength, I'm really skinny, I'm really weak, but somehow I managed to hold on and hold on and hold on. It seemed like an eternity, but again, probably only a minute or so. Eventually they yanked me away, and as I was pulled away from the chassis of the car, my fingertips clipped the number plate, and out popped 3 of the 4 screws, so the Prime Minister's number plate swung by a single screw. So I was grabbed, frog-marched off into, I think it was Burlington Arcade. They put those special handcuffs, they're like stocks, and they close, and they close them really tight, and they cut into your wrists. Then they twist them, and it feels like a knife is cutting into your wrists. It's excruciatingly painful. And I wasn't putting up any resistance, but they were clearly peeved that I had breached prime ministerial security. When we got to, I think it was Vine Street Police Station, I said to them, well, I think rather than arresting me, you ought to take me on as advisor about how to improve your security. If I had an Uzi submachine gun in my jacket rather than a placard, I could have killed the Prime Minister. They said, what do you mean? It's bulletproof. It's a bulletproof car. And I said, yes. But at the point where the glass of the windows meets the car frame and the point where the car doors open, there isn't full bulletproofing there. If I put the nozzle of the machine gun there, I could have fired and had a fair chance of a bullet getting into that vehicle. They were shocked. So we ended up having a fairly civil conversation about how to improve the Prime Minister's security. And generously enough, they allowed me to phone the Press Association to make a statement, and then had a whip around to buy me a meal. So there's some nice police officers. At the end of the day, I faced charges, but they were all dropped, as so often happens. So I got away with it. And what I did was really small and insignificant at one level, but it's one of the very few examples where the Prime Minister himself was directly, personally confronted in the run-up to the Iraq War.